Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Len McCluskey, fresh from number 10. When was the last time you were in there?
Oh gosh, that's going back a while.
Gordon Brown?
Probably, yes. I was certainly in there with Gordon and with Tony. Yes, you'd have to go back that length of time.
And you hadn't spoken to Theresa May until the phone call?
That's also true, yes.
Last week?
Yeah, which was a point that I was able to say to the Prime Minister. It doesn't help when there's been this kind of attitude from the Conservative government that trade unions are the enemy within. Now, I also recognise...
You were hardly flirting with them from a
No,
distance.
exactly, and I recognise the fact that I can be quite outspoken against...
You said that?
Yes, I did. I told her that, I
Acknowledged some of your
wasn't
language.
necessarily looking to be top of her Christmas card list, but she should recognise that the trade unions are the largest voluntary sector body in our society. We represent organised labour, and of course, organised labour plays such a major role in the creation of wealth in our society. So this attitude that has pervaded the Conservative Party since Thatcher's years of not talking to the trade unions is really counterproductive. And my mind goes back to Cameron, to David Cameron, who I didn't particularly have a lot of time for. He didn't have a lot of time for me. He was constantly attacking me. But right at the 11th hour, they asked to meet us in the referendum
campaign,
because they were scared that they were going to lose it. And I thought then, I remember meeting George Osborne and saying, well, isn't this meeting a long time coming? Why is there such an arm's length approach to trade unions? We can have our political differences, but there's a lot to talk about. Now, to be fair, I have a reasonably good relationship with the business secretary, Greg Clark. We've done some good work in the automotive sector, in Bombardier and in other manufacturing areas. So I was saying to the Prime Minister that this attitude of excluding the trade unions from virtually everything is wrong, and this is maybe an opportunity for her to take a more pragmatic and realistic approach to many of the issues that and problems that face our nation at the moment.
But in terms of Brexit itself, we're weeks from the date we're meant to leave, and you're going in the door to talk about all the things you want, which are quite a distance from a lot of the things she wants. The chances of you inputting, shaping our Brexit deal are remote, aren't they?
Well, again, if indeed it was just a PR stunt, then it's been a waste of everyone's time.
But you feel an obligation when the Prime Minister picks up the
Yeah,
phone.
of course.
You have to go in because you represent a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Jeremy Corbyn, who didn't go in.
Except Jeremy Corbyn is leader of a political party.
Indeed.
And he has to make judgments. I think he's been vindicated. The SNP and the Liberal Democrats look stupid.
She's making hay with it, though, isn't she? She's standing there saying you speak to all these... You've been proud over the years, Jeremy Corbyn, and all the people you speak to without preconditions. And that has been one of his badges of pride.
But I don't think that is...
and he's sort of letting her get away with that argument.
I don't think so. I don't think it's captured any kind of resonance amongst ordinary working people. He took a political judgment. I think he's been vindicated. The Labour Party is very much a reflection of our nation. I think 100 Labour MPs come from Remain constituencies, 150 come from Leave constituencies. I think Corbyn very skillfully has navigated the Labour Party through.
He's done the splits, he's been ambiguous.
Well, he certainly kept the party together in a very statesmanlike fashion. I'm a general secretary of a trade union. And, I don't know, 60% of my members may have voted Remain, 40% may have voted Leave. A lot of our members voted Labour, but some of our members vote Conservative. So
I want to ask you a bit about that. The people, you've got a lot of members who voted Leave, who are at ground zero for no-deal Brexit, maybe even some of them for any kind of Brexit. They will hurt. They are in supply chain sensitive industries. What do you think motivated that choice that they made? And have you sensed any shift?
Any movement? Well, in my opinion, two main reasons why people voted leave. One is the forgotten towns and cities that have been deindustrialised, nothing put in its place, precarious work, 0-hour contracts, and you can go all over the country, in particular in the north, but not just in the north, all over our nation, the Midlands, the southwest, where that has happened. And the other major reason is the concern about migrant labour. And the Conservative Party, for me, have done nothing, the governments have done nothing to address either of those issues. What is the industrial policy, the industrial strategies to reinvest in those forgotten areas? Nothing. 2.5 years on, those people are still in exactly the same situation as they were.
Isn't the truth that some of that migration concern wasn't just about price competition? It was something more cultural. People were actually casting a vote knowing that it might make them a bit poorer because they weren't completely happy with what had happened with migration in this country, not just from Eastern Europe, but over decades.
No, I think it's a question more of the impact of greedy bosses, because remember, migrant workers...
This isn't what the Leave campaign thought, and they seem to have been quite canny. They seem to think that thought they were playing something else, a cultural note, as it were, rather than an economic one.
Well, the Leave campaign sailed very closely to rather racist issues.
And won.
Well, they won, yes.
But you're saying that's got nothing to do with any of this?
Look, I believe, I come from a working class background. I brought up there. For me, ordinary working people are inherently decent, inclusive individuals. Or is there an element of racism out in our nation at the moment? Well, of course there is. However, I don't believe that it was the issue of cultural change. I believe it was about the fact that migrant workers who are to blame for nothing, they're just like you and I looking to have a better life for themselves and their family, were used and abused by greedy bosses to undercut paying conditions. I'll give you a great example. There's a Croatian company up in the northeast who've just won a contract to turn waste into energy. That Croatian company immediately announced that they would bring a Croatian workforce with them, complete. So local people are not given an opportunity. Now that creates a reaction.
You're not saying that happens in Airbus, in Rolls-Royce?
No, that's different.
In major car manufacturers. That's what I'm talking about. And I'm really interested what you know, because you're plugged into these people better than some. What goes on in their mind? Because they've been told again and again by you and others that what we are heading for could harm them economically, and yet they made that choice and they're not moving? That's my other question.
I mean,
are they shifting?
I would suggest in a considerable number of organised manufacturing areas, the question of the free movement of labour was not an issue for people. For example, you mentioned Airbus and the car industry. When workers move across the channel both ways, they're moving into a trade union organised environment, so there's no undercutting of paying conditions, and therefore there is less of a concern.
Brexit?
There is less of a concern.
Why did they vote Brexit?
Well, when you say why did they vote Brexit, I suspect the majority of our manufacturing members voted to remain.
I think you've got some pretty stronghold feelings. And we know there are now in some car manufacturers. We talk to people as they come out of a shift change and the rest
because
of it.
you have people are not just isolated in their workplace, they live in communities, and there is this concern that the unemployment that people may experience, or their families or their neighbours and friends, they can't get jobs because the rates of pay have been reduced by the greedy bosses who are utilising migrant workers. I need to constantly repeat, Gary, that migrant workers aren't to blame for this. Now, Labour have policies to deal with that.
Do you sense any buyer's remorse amongst those Leave voters?
The indication that we have, because one of the things that we did immediately was set up a Brexit watch. For 2.5 years now, I've been in conversation with my shop stewards, and there is very little sign of a movement either way.
What do you attribute that to? Because you and others are telling them this is going to hurt.
I think it's down to the fact that for a long period of time, there was a view that the metropolitan elite, the political elite, weren't listening to anybody. And there was an opportunity to give them a kicking. Now, the fact is that once that divide is crossed, I think it's difficult. It's one of the reasons why I'm not sure about a second referendum. Why I believe.
I think you've gone further than saying you're not sure.
Well, I've said it's dangerous. I've said I think it's a risk that for both Labour and indeed for the nation. I think we are a divided nation.
Do you share that risk? Do you share the concern that the Prime Minister articulated the other day about social cohesion, which normally means trouble on the streets?
I absolutely do share that. Interestingly enough, I mean, Tony Blair, not a person I quote too often, but he said very recently that we shouldn't let the thugs of the far right actually dictate whether we have a second referendum.
What's your answer to that?
I thought that was a reasonable point for him to make, except Tony Blair doesn't live in the areas and the constituencies where there would be a real impact. I believe to dismiss the idea of the rise of the far right as the genuine voice of Leave and working class voters is very, very dangerous. And I would sooner, I've said very clearly that a second referendum is not the preferred option for the Labour Party. Now, I come from the position that having lost, coming out of the European Union is not the end of the world.
Do you suspect there are an awful lot of people in the Labour Party who haven't come to terms with BrExit, and some of them are even hiding behind certain motions, amendments that are in front of Parliament soon, and they're not being candid about the fact that they want to stop the whole thing happening?
I'm sure that's the case for some people. You know, this is a very emotive issue. Within both,
some of them in the shadow cabinet.
Within both sides of the House, you have groups of individuals who are very pro-European, desperately think that the British people made a mistake 2.5 years ago and would desperately like to go back and correct the mistake as they see it. So yeah, I'm sure that's the case, and it's another reason why I say that Corbyn has done a remarkable job at the moment in keeping a genuine course that
keeping away from a second referendum.
Well, has kept people together. Well, the Labour Party have laid down an amendment that is multifaceted.
Yes, smothered the whole issue.
Including,
it's ingenious. There's been years of experience that have been applied to this.
Maybe it was ingenious, but the reality is it's in line with Labour Party policy, and therefore it avoids the attacks and criticisms that might come. Now, some people may criticise Corbyn genuinely, but as you well know, there are groups of people in the Labour Party and some grandees who would seek any opportunity to attack Corbyn.
Just before we come to Tony Blair, who I'm sure you're thinking of there, what do you think Keir Starmer's up to? Do you think he'd like to guide Jeremy Corbyn gently by the hand to a second referendum?
I think Keir is, he's a very skillful politician. He comes from a constituency that you might call Remain Central. Very strong Remain constituency. I'm sure he would rest easier at night if there was a second referendum and people voted to stay in the European Union. And it's a good example about what the point you're making. Let me make this very quick point. Shadow cabinet. You've got Jeremy Corbyn, who's the leader of our party, comes from a constituency that voted 70% to remain. And you've got Ian Lavery in the shadow cabinet, who's chair of the Labour Party, who comes from a constituency that voted 70% to leave. Now, that's the difficulty that Corbyn as the leader has to grapple with.
You touched there on the big gulf, the broad church that the Labour Party still is, because as far as I know, Tony Blair still pays his subs, and you're in that party, Jeremy Corbyn is running it. When you think into the maybe not that distant future, do you think there is a place for someone like Tony Blair? That particular kind of social democrat?
Yeah, look, since the inception of the Labour Party, and we could have a great debate about the history of the Labour Party, there's always been an issue between left and right and arguments about what policies should be pursued. My view is that the Labour Party should be open to everyone and anyone who has a social conscience and seeks a better world.
Yeah,
now,
but where are you drawing the line there? I mean, there's probably quite a few of these, even some of the MPs you look at, and you think, actually, why aren't you in the Liberal Democrats? And maybe it'd be better if you were.
Well, of course I might have a view. Somebody said to me a couple of weeks ago when Frank Fields announced, what do you think of Frank Field leaving the Labour Party? And my answer was, I thought Frank left the Labour Party about 30 years ago. You know, look, it is a broad church, and you have to try to see if there's an arena that can take on board people's views. Tony Blair won 3 general elections. There was this dramatic new Labour format, and at the time, I mean, you may have asked me on that occasion, or Tony Blair, should Len McCluskey be in the Labour Party, because I disagreed, not with many of the civil things that he did, but for me, New Labour didn't challenge the very essence of the power that exists. It didn't shift towards working
and
people.
you hope that a Corbyn-led government will do just that?
Yes, absolutely.
So, tell me a bit about how it will work with the MPs then, because if we were to have, you would hope, an election this year, and Jeremy Corbyn were to become Prime Minister, most people think it would probably be a minority status, a bit of a mirror image perhaps of what we're looking at now with Theresa May. It'd be jolly hard to get rid of the MPs that are there already to do a purge in the time permitted, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I see.
No plans, no thoughts, no secret lists.
I don't have any plans to purge anybody.
So it'd be the same cast, more or less, that come back in, you hope with more.
Except I think what you have in the Labour Party is people now who've learnt from the last general election. Remember, most of the Labour MPs, if not all of them, sitting in Parliament at the moment, have had increased majorities, not because of their own personal charisma, but because of Corbyn. And what Corbyn presented to the nation, this new form of politics, honest, decent, what you see is what you get, and a manifesto that spoke about uniting our nation. Now, all I want for people, I don't want people to give oaths, loyalty oaths, or to stop criticising where they believe there's genuine criticism. But you do have a small group of Labour MPs who basically, first thing they do when they wake up of a morning is try to think of something they can attack Jeremy Corbyn on.
You could do without them, you think?
Well, I wouldn't lose any sleep if they weren't there, but I'm not concentrating my energy.
There's an awful lot, but you're right, but I'm sure that certain people were pretty astonished by how well Jeremy Corbyn did in the last election, Labour MPs amongst them, not a few journalists as well.
Yeah.
And that might have shifted perceptions a bit, but they still see them, they define themselves as very separate from his project still. And there's more than 24 troublemakers potentially there. Do you ever think they might, not immediately perhaps, a little bit into I'm thinking more than a problem, a little bit into an administration, maybe try and mount a coup.
Yeah, that's a great question. If I agree with you, I think if there was a general election shortly, I think Labour would form a government. I think it would be a minority government. And of course, the question is, well, is there a group of MPs who would block a particular view? That's a perfectly legitimate question. All you can do is hope that those individuals respect the fact that they're there representing working people and that they have a leader and a manifesto that has taken us to power. You say a couple of dozen. Remember, you're talking about 250 Labour MPs, the vast majority of whom, in my opinion, respect Corbyn as a leader and would follow.
I think I could get it well above 24.
I'm not sure you could, to be honest, Gary. I'm not sure you could.
People who go to bed wondering whether they're in the right party still.
You and I could sit down privately and probably come up with a list. And the point you're making, I'm not dismissing. It's a reasonable point, which is why the democratisation of the Labour Party is so important. It's why we now have the largest political party in Europe. That's an extraordinary thing because of Corbyn. And those members want to say on who speaks on their behalf. And in that context, I think they have to recognise. Now, I know lots of MPs, don't press me to give you names, I know lots of MPs who disagreed with Corbyn and who now say, do you know what, we respect what is happening in the Labour Party. And that's all you can hope for.
I could think of quite a few MPs who wonder whether the last manifesto, which they felt able to stand on, because they did, and they came back with it. Nonetheless, whether that was, I mean, some people say it looked like sort of Swedish Social Democrats and it left a year. It wasn't as radical, as revolutionary as they think everything they've ever heard John McDonnell say over the years, and they wonder whether it was a bit of a Trojan horse and actually Labour would do something else in office. There's an awful lot of MPs who tell me they worry about that.
I think that's an excuse. The reality is that when Corbyn, one thing that Corbyn has brought to politics is an honesty. Now, in terms of the manifesto, Corbyn would honour that manifesto. People say to me sometimes, oh, it wasn't a very revolutionary. And of course, there's an element of truth in that. But you have to ask yourself...
But it was revolutionary enough.
It was, and you have to ask yourself the question, why is the establishment so desperate for Corbyn not to get into power? And the reason being that they know that he would bring about that shift in the balance of power in favour of ordinary working people.
So are you in favour of replacing capitalism or reforming it?
Oh, reforming it. I mean...
That's a move. You moved, haven't you?
Not particularly. I mean, I know people have me
labelled through a few old speeches.
Yeah, you may well have. Of course, capitalism is the system that we operate under. Throughout this world, Oxfam have just actually come up with an astonishing revelation. 26 individuals have more wealth and power than 50% of the world population. That's extraordinary because of capitalism.
You acknowledge that it would probably be a minority government if it was a government. The numbers are really tough to get to anywhere else.
Yeah.
What do you think, what kind of deal would Jeremy Corbyn strike with the SNP?
You'd have to ask Jeremy, but I know what I would do. I wouldn't cut a deal with anybody. I wouldn't cut a deal with the SNP. I would lay down my programme and I would say to the SNP, are you going to support that programme? And if there were particular fundamental issues that they couldn't support, I might look at that. But I wouldn't cut a deal with them. The reality is that if you get into a situation, and I know we're dealing with hypotheses at the moment, if you get into a situation where Labour is in power and forms a government, they can only form a government if they can get their Queen's speech through Parliament. And the SNP would have to answer to their electorate in Scotland if they decided not to...
You think you could face them down?
I think
They've got nowhere else to go.
Well, I wouldn't quite put it that way, because I think a lot of what the SNP would want and stand for is close to a radical Labour Party programme. But I don't think it would require detailed negotiations. It wouldn't be a coalition government, it would be a minority government. I believe people would...
Ducking and diving, doing deals with different people, different days.
I don't think it's a question of ducking and diving. I think it would be a simple question of we're putting out a transitional change to our nation, a programme that would bring about fairness and decency. And I think they would get it through and they would govern until such times as you had to go back to the people again.
As we're on this hypothetical of a Jeremy Corbyn government, and we've already touched on the word coup with Labour MPs, how relaxed are you about how the security establishment would react if Jeremy Corbyn were to go near certain of their treasured jewels?
I'm relaxed, let me put it that way.
So that's not very relaxed?
Well, I'm never very relaxed when you're dealing with security forces and secretive issues. But, I've watched The House of Cards and other issues, a very British coup.
The Chris Mullen novel and
the
TV
Chris
series.
Mullen novel. And
that was a coup against a Labour government, and Harold Wilson probably saw something, a sniff of something like that.
Absolutely. I think life has changed since Harry Perkins was done in Chris
The hero
Mullen.
of that novel, yeah.
It was, yes. I remember wearing a badge, vote for Harry Perkins, at Labour Party conferences when I was a young...
Nobody's
I don't
instinctively more against a lot of the things that they most treasure than Jeremy Corbyn. And
Well,
if he goes near those,
well,
are you saying he wouldn't go near those things? He'd leave that side of the policy agenda alone.
Well, you'd have to tell me what you were talking about.
Well, I suppose NATO,
for example, well,
British
I don't
military
think
engagement.
I don't think NATO is an issue.
Contributions, security services' ability to do what they do at the moment.
No, I think the opposite is the case in many respects. I don't think NATO is an issue. I don't think a Labour government would seek to do anything there. I think Labour has talked about putting 20,000 more police on the street, strengthening the security forces and their campaign against terrorism, which is critical. So no, I don't think we're into a Chris Mullins situation.
Jeremy Corbyn wasn't always your candidate for leadership. At the very beginning, if we go back a while in history, you were thinking of Andy Burnham in 2015.
No, I'm glad you've asked me the question, because I read things. Jeremy Corbyn was always my candidate when he became a candidate. Remember, initially there were only 3 individuals.
The moment he was on the list, he was yours.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt.
You wobbled a bit, though, didn't you, once he was leader, as a lot of people did. The polls were going badly.
No, not at all.
And you wondered how things might need to be remedied and corrected.
No, I never wobbled for one moment. My union was fully supportive. My personal involvement and support for Jeremy is well known. Just to clarify, when there was only 3 candidates, then Andy Burnham was my choice. You might say, some might say, a bit harsh on Andy, the best of a bad bunch. But the reality is, as soon as Corbyn became a candidate, he was not only my choice, but my union's choice.
You were worried how badly it was going at one point. They were doing really badly in the polls. January 2017, you said the polls were awful. I'm sure Jeremy won't cling on to power for the sake of it. You were contemplating life after Jeremy back then. And I suppose what I'm asking you is he there for the whole of this journey? If we're talking all the way up to the next general election, and has he surprised you a bit? You as well. We were talking about how the media and other politicians are surprised. Were you surprised?
First of all, yeah. Was I surprised by the general election result? I was. I was surprised, I suppose, as everyone else.
Has he surprised you?
Although during that general election, things started to happen that I've never seen in 50 years involvement in the Labour Party. Thousands of people coming out to see him onto the beach, in stadiums, queuing up for hours in the rain. I've never seen anything like that. So something was happening. Has Jeremy surprised me? Not really. A very decent, humble man who believes passionately in a fair society. And let me say, is he going to be there for the duration? Absolutely, because younger people can't keep up with him. His energy is amazing.
After him, Labour's got to have a woman leader, haven't they?
In my view, when Jeremy steps down, I would think it should be a woman leader.
Can you see one? Can you see any
candidates? I can see a number. Oh my gosh.
Names?
Emily Thornberry, Angela Rayner, and this Rebecca Long-Bailey. What a stunning performer she is. We've got young people coming up like Laura Pidcock. What a fantastic people they are. Oh yeah, and I can see lots of women in the Labour Party who could develop into leaders, and I look forward to the day when Jeremy has been Prime Minister, maybe for 2 terms, and he hands over to one of these great women we have to continue to make certain that we've got a better Britain for ordinary people.
Thank you very much indeed.